We're at the IAS meeting. We're here with Pye Jakobsson, who's a sex worker from Sweden. And we have had a lot of discussion and sessions and with their posters. It's a lot going on with the sex workers. And we always enjoy the opportunity to ask for a person like yourself to speak to the issues, to have us help us understand some of the challenges you face and how that works in the system.
Yeah, right. And I think it's obviously there are very diverse challenges across the different regions. But as I'm also president of the Global Network of Sex Work Projects, I'm pretty, well aware of all the issues that actually we face that we have in common. We even did this big consensus statement. We asked all our member organizations, there is more than 240 member organizations in over 70 countries, which rights they felt were violated, which problems they were facing, and together they identify 8 rights that they felt were violated. And obviously discrimination and stigma is a major problem for sex workers, as with other key populations, and as is criminalization. But I also think that if you look at certain regions, you will have more issues around morality, or religion will play a major role. In Europe, so-called feminism, I'm using the term very, very loosely here because I'm a feminist, I think. But there has been a major push for something they call the Swedish model, which is from Sweden, where I'm from, which is based on the idea that all the clients are violators and all the sex workers are victims, which has, I think, to the surprise of many people around us, been sort of turned into the biggest fear of a lot of sex workers, because although criminalization is bad, someone, in this case the state, actually putting a victim label on you is probably the most effective silencing technique you can ever find. Because if you're a victim and you object to being a victim, you are obviously such a victim you don't even know what's good for you. And silencing is just something that happens in many regions for many different reasons.
Now, there are people that are actually put into almost like slavery into sex work, but that's a different situation.
It is a different situation, and I think sometimes I wish that people can take the sex out of sex work for a second. I understand sex for a lot of people is something very private. I'm sure, making a really loving meal for a lot of people is something very private as well. Or like taking care of children is something very private, but there are people that work with that as well. And I think we have to take a step back and realize that this is work for some people, right? And as with other labors, especially informal labors, there is unfortunately room for exploitation. So if you look at other informal sectors like au pairs or like household work or a lot of low-paid sort of labors as well, there is room for a lot of exploitation, mainly because the governments don't care that much about sort of making sure that everybody has the labor rights. And that is also true for the sex industry, but not more true for the sex industry than in other industries. And again, depending on the region, it will look differently. In Sweden, the most common trafficking victim in Sweden would be people from Asia mainly, coming to Sweden to pick berries in the north, right? And we don't ban like pancakes because of it. I think we have to be very careful in putting morals into human rights, because when we look at any other industry, garment industries, carpet industries, you're well aware of that. There will be child labor, there will be people living in factories. And we don't look at that and think we're going to ban carpets. We think, shit, we need to get unions in there and we need to give them labor rights. And this is no different.
Right. And every country has to establish a movement to to improve their lives for all the people in that country. And I think that it happens slowly because obviously in certain countries where they have such a low standard of living, you can't. It's like we're in the United States, we're deciding to move from $7.50 an hour to $15 an hour, and maybe in some states it's just a lot more than needs to be because it's reasonable, move up a little
right,
bit.
and I also,
So it's a progression, I think.
No, and and I also think, for some reason when it comes to sex work, again, I understand personal morals and all that, but when it comes to sex work, people are like, oh, but what about those that are forced for financial reasons? And we talk about it like the rest of the world are just going to work because they love it.
Right.
Most people actually go to work because they have a rent to pay, right, and because they have children to feed, and because they need to make a living. And we don't say, oh wow, no, this guy, he's like a technician in during the IAS conference because he's coerced because he needs to pay his rent. Yeah. And again, this is no different. People do what they need to do to have the life they imagine they want to have. Mm-hmm. And for some people that includes selling sex.
Mm-hmm. So are there other issues you want to bring to the table? Because we don't get these opportunities too often.
Sure, yeah. I think that one of the major issues, and a lot of people have sort of been made a little bit aware of it due to all the storm around amnesty that's been going around the world. Amnesty suddenly is like the voice of pimps, which is sort of funny. But anyway, that people even imagine that suddenly overnight Amnesty turned completely crazy and went haywire and are now the spokesperson for pimps. I think what needs to be addressed is the confusion around legalization and decriminalization, because most sex work rights activists argue for decriminalization, and then I will hear arguments against that, and people are saying, yeah, but look at Germany, look at Holland, it's not that good, but they have legalized. So I think, a super short, lesson on what the difference is useful. And when you criminalize sex work, you have the sex industry and you put all these like special laws around it to control it, right? You criminalize clients, sex workers, whatever, third parties. When you legalize, you take away all the special laws and you put a new set of special laws around. Again, to control, very much contain, minimize.
What would some of those laws be?
Some of those laws, when you legalize, will be mandatory testing, for example. And for some people, it sounds like, yeah, but isn't it good to know that they're healthy? Yes, but if we're going to mandatory test sex workers, I suggest we mandatory test every single person that have an active sex life. Yeah. Because sex workers are as responsible about their sexual health, probably a little bit more even though, I would argue. Mm-hmm. And, we don't need special laws for special people, because we are all human beings.
Right, but
so when you decriminalize...
But you would still advocate for regular testing, like you said.
I would argue for regular testing for anyone that has a sex life. Especially if you know that you haven't been taking care of your sexual health, or if you've been engaged in situations where you feel unsure about whether you could control your sexual health or not. And just in general, I advocate for people taking care of their sexual health as I advocate for people taking care of their health in general.
We ought to recommend, like they do in the car, they say every 10,000 miles, say every so many sex acts you should be tested.
Yes, so that should go for everybody.
Just as a suggestion of a normal process.
Yeah, and I wouldn't know the exact, it's like, I don't know, the number of, times of sex or the number of sex partners.
There is this, one of our interns did a survey or a study, and he said, it's exponential at some point. You hit somebody who's also had a lot of sexual activity.
Sure, of course.
And that's where it blows up really big.
Yeah, no, sure. On the other hand, it's like, so when sex workers are able to operate in an enabling environment, which brings us to decriminalization, where the special laws are gone and we actually just use normal laws, the laws that protect you
everybody
are allowed to protect me as well. Where rape is still illegal and slavery is still illegal and all those things are still illegal.
Right.
But we don't criminalize buying, selling sex or enabling the purchase or selling of sex. There are plenty of evidence that prove that that's the best environment for sex workers to actually take care of their sexual health. The Lancet says it. It lowers the risk of HIV with more than 30% for sex workers. In Australia, where they've done a lot of studies around this, sex workers working in a decriminalized environment, which is one state in Australia, have a lower rate of STI than the general population. Because for me, you see, my sexual health, if my sexual health gets screwed up, I can't work tomorrow.
That's right.
Right? So it's about paying my rent. So I have a really good incentive of taking care of it.
Good. Well, I'm certainly appreciating your taking the time
Sure.
to kind of bring to light the issues that are important for sex workers. And this has been a lot at this conference about it.
We've been very visible.
Thank you
We're
very
good at campaigning.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you
appreciate
so much.
it.
Thank you.